My phone buzzed at exactly 11:58 on my 28th birthday. Same message as always. "Sorry, Claire, we've been so busy with Madison's situation. Maybe next year." 2 minutes later, Madison's Instagram story popped up showing her designer purse collection spread across a luxury hotel bed in the Bahamas. While I sat alone with a gas station cupcake, she was living it up on what I later discovered was my inheritance money. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was war, and I was about to discover just how deep this betrayal went. Growing up, I always assumed my parents were just naturally drawn to Madison's drama. She was 3 years younger, blonde where I was brunette outgoing, where I was reserved. But sitting in that empty apartment on my birthday, staring at her tropical paradise posts while my own family couldn't even remember to call something clicked. This pattern was too perfect, too consistent to be coincidence. I started thinking back to every major milestone Madison had somehow managed to overshadow. My high school graduation, where I was valedictorian, should have been a proud moment for any parent. Instead, Mom and Dad rushed off halfway through the ceremony because Madison suddenly needed an emergency college tour in another state. She was only 15 then, and somehow her college visit couldn't wait even one day. Then there was my promotion to senior marketing coordinator last year. I had planned a small celebration dinner, nothing fancy, just family at Olive Garden. 2 hours before we were supposed to meet, Dad called frantically explaining that Madison was having a mental health crisis after her boyfriend broke up with her. They needed to drive 3 hours to her apartment immediately. The celebration never happened. My apartment warming party 6 months ago was the final straw I thought I'd already reached. I had saved for 2 years to afford my own place. No roommates, no shared bathrooms. I was so proud. 15 minutes before guests were supposed to arrive, Mom texted that Madison was in emergency surgery and they had to rush to the hospital. I found out later through Madison's Instagram that her emergency surgery was a nose job she'd been planning for months. But tonight, something made me dig deeper. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the stark contrast between my gas station cupcake and her 5-star resort. But I found myself scrolling through Madison's social media with new eyes. That's when I noticed something strange about the timing of her posts. Every single family emergency that pulled our parents away from my events corresponded exactly with Madison posting from some fun activity or trip. The day of my graduation, she posted from a spa day. During my promotion dinner crisis, she was at a wine tasting with friends. The night of my apartment warming emergency, she was at a fancy restaurant laughing with her sorority sisters. I grabbed my laptop and started creating a timeline. What I found made my stomach drop. For the past 5 years, every single important event in my life had been sabotaged by a perfectly timed Madison crisis. The pattern was so precise it couldn't be accidental. That's when I remembered something that made everything click into place. Last month, when I was helping Madison move some boxes from her car, her phone screen lit up with a calendar notification. I only glanced at it for a second, but now the memory came flooding back crystal clear. The notification read, "Family Crisis Reminder, Claire's birthday weekend." My hands started shaking as the reality hit me. Madison hadn't just been the golden child getting lucky with timing. She'd been deliberately orchestrating crises to steal attention from my achievements. She'd been sabotaging my relationship with our parents for years, and they had no idea they were being manipulated. I spent the rest of that night going through old family photos, text messages, anything that could confirm what I was beginning to suspect. The evidence was overwhelming once I knew what to look for. Madison's emergencies were always vague, always required immediate parental attention, and always resolved conveniently after my events had passed. But discovering the deliberate sabotage was just the beginning. Something told me this rabbit hole went much deeper than missed birthdays and family dinners. If Madison was capable of this level of manipulation, what else had she been hiding? 2 days after my birthday revelation, I couldn't shake the feeling that Madison's manipulations extended beyond just stealing family time. I kept thinking about her lifestyle compared to mine. We both worked entry-level jobs after college, yet somehow she afforded designer clothes, expensive vacations, and a luxury apartment, while I struggled to pay rent in a shared space. I decided to do something I probably should have done years ago, actually read through Grandma Rose's will carefully. When she passed 3 years ago, Mom had handled all the legal paperwork, explaining briefly that Grandma had left small monthly payments for both Madison and me to help with expenses as we started our careers. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Grandma Rose had left both Madison and me $1,500 per month until we turned 30, specifically designated as independence funds, to help us build our lives without family financial pressure. I had never received a single payment. My first thought was that there must have been some mistake with the bank or legal processing. I called the estate attorney whose name was listed in the will paperwork. Mrs. Peterson was kind but confused when I explained I'd never received any payments. "That's very strange, dear," she said. "The payments have been processing automatically for 3 years now. Let me pull up the account information." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Mrs. Peterson spoke again, her voice careful and concerned. "Claire, I'm looking at the account details now. The payments have been depositing regularly into an account with your name on it. But there's something very irregular here. Can you please verify your Social Security number for me?" I rattled off my Social Security number, the same 9 digits I'd been using my entire adult life. Mrs. Peterson's sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. "The account receiving your inheritance payments has your Social Security number and your legal name, but the contact information address and secondary account holder listed is your sister Madison. It appears someone opened this account using your identity, but with her information as the primary contact." The room started spinning. $18,000 per year for 3 years. $54,000 that should have changed my entire life trajectory. Money that would have eliminated my student loans, allowed me to live independently, maybe even helped me buy a car that didn't break down every other month. Mrs. Peterson explained that she would need to file a formal complaint and freeze the account immediately, but the damage was already done. Madison had been living off my inheritance for years, while I scraped by on ramen noodles and generic groceries. I spent the next hour on the phone with my bank, discovering that the fraudulent account had been opened with forged documentation bearing my signature. The bank representative, Mr. Johnson, walked me through the account history with growing concern in his voice. "Miss, I have to tell you, this appears to be a sophisticated identity theft operation. Whoever did this had access to all of your personal information and was able to forge your signature well enough to fool our verification processes. Do you have any idea who might have had access to this level of personal information about you?" Of course I knew. Madison had grown up in the same house, had access to all of our family documents, and had watched me sign my name thousands of times throughout our lives. She knew my Social Security number from family paperwork, my mother's maiden name from family stories, and every piece of personal information needed to assume my identity. But the truly devastating part wasn't just the money she'd stolen. It was the realization that while I had been struggling to make ends meet, working overtime shifts, and denying myself basic comforts, Madison had been living a luxury lifestyle, funded by my rightful inheritance. Every designer purse, every expensive vacation, every luxury apartment amenity had been paid for with money that was legally and morally mine. The bank investigation would take weeks, but Mr. Johnson assured me that this level of identity theft was a federal crime. Madison hadn't just been playing favorites with family time. She had committed serious financial fraud that could land her in prison. As I hung up the phone, I realized this was probably just the tip of the iceberg. If Madison was capable of stealing my inheritance so systematically, what other financial crimes had she committed using my identity? The inheritance theft was too serious to handle alone, so I did what I thought was the right thing. I called my parents. Surely when Mom and Dad learned that Madison had been stealing from me for years, they would be as horrified as I was. Surely they would help me confront her and make this right. I was so wrong it was almost laughable. I drove to their house the next evening armed with all the bank documentation and legal papers from Mrs. Peterson. Mom was in the kitchen making her famous pot roast, and Dad was watching the evening news in his recliner. The scene was so normal, so familiar, that for a moment I almost convinced myself this was all a terrible misunderstanding that we could clear up as a family. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you both about something serious." I began spreading the papers across their dining room table. I found out Madison has been stealing my inheritance money from Grandma Rose. The reaction I expected was shock, outrage, immediate concern for my well-being. What I got instead was an uncomfortable silence, followed by a look that passed between my parents that I couldn't quite interpret. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Claire, sweetheart, maybe you should sit down." That phrase has never in the history of human communication preceded good news. I sat. Mom wiped her hands on her apron and joined us at the table, her expression more resigned than surprised. "Honey, we know about the account situation." The words hit me like a physical blow. You know Madison has been stealing my money and you didn't tell me." "It's not stealing," Dad said carefully. "Madison came to us about a year after Grandma passed. She was concerned about your spending habits and thought maybe it would be better if the money was managed more responsibly." I stared at them, unable to process what I was hearing. My spending habits. What spending habits? I can barely afford groceries. Mom reached across the table like she was going to pat my hand, but I pulled away. "Sweetie, Madison showed us some concerning things. Credit card statements, online shopping receipts, evidence that you were making impulsive financial decisions." "What credit card statements? I don't have any credit cards except for my one emergency card that I never use." Another look passed between my parents. This time, I recognized it. It was the look they used to share when I was a child and had been caught in a lie they both knew I was telling. "Claire," Dad said gently, "Madison has documentation of several credit accounts in your name with significant balances. She was trying to protect you from making financial mistakes that could ruin your credit." The room started spinning again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from rage. Madison hadn't just stolen my money. She had convinced our parents that I was financially irresponsible by showing them evidence of financial irresponsibility that she herself had created using my stolen identity. Stolen. Did it ever occur to either of you to ask me about these supposed spending habits before deciding I couldn't handle my own inheritance? My voice was getting louder, but I didn't care. Mom's face took on that patient expression she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. "Madison was trying to help you, sweetheart. She didn't want to embarrass you by bringing it to your attention directly. She thought it would be kinder to just manage the situation quietly until you got your finances under control." Manage the situation quietly by stealing $54,000. "It's not stealing if it's for your own good," Dad said firmly. "Madison has been using that money responsibly. She's invested some of it, saved some of it, and yes, she's used some for living expenses, but all with the intention of eventually helping you when you're ready to handle money more maturely." I looked at my parents, these people who had raised me, who I thought knew me better than anyone, and realized they had been completely manipulated. Madison had crafted such a convincing narrative about my supposed financial irresponsibility that they genuinely believed they were protecting me by allowing her to steal from me. But the most devastating part was that they were looking at me with pity, like I was the problem that needed to be managed, rather than the victim of a systematic fraud. Have either of you actually looked at my real bank accounts, my actual spending patterns? Do you have any evidence of financial irresponsibility that didn't come directly from Madison? Another silence, another exchanged look. "Madison wouldn't lie about something this serious," Mom said finally. "She loves you, Claire. Everything she's done has been to protect you from yourself." I gathered up my papers and stood to leave. "So let me get this straight. Madison comes to you with supposed evidence that I'm financially irresponsible. You never verify this evidence with me or any independent source. You decide that she should secretly manage my inheritance money for my own good. And when I discover this theft and come to you for support, your response is that I should be grateful for being robbed. That's not fair, Claire, Dad said. We were trying to do what's best for everyone. No, I said, heading for the door. You were doing what's best for Madison, like always. As I drove home, the full scope of Madison's manipulation became clear. She hadn't just stolen my money. She had systematically destroyed my credibility with our parents while positioning herself as my concerned protector. They weren't just complicit in the theft. They had been convinced that the theft was an act of love. But if Madison had been creating fake financial evidence to justify stealing my inheritance, what other lies had she told about me? And what other aspects of my life had she been sabotaging while presenting herself as my caring sister? After that disastrous conversation with my parents, I knew I was completely on my own. If I was going to expose Madison's manipulation, I needed evidence so overwhelming that even my parents couldn't deny the truth. I also needed to know the full extent of the damage she'd caused to my life. The next morning, I called in sick to work and dedicated the entire day to investigating my own financial history. What I discovered was worse than I could have imagined. My first stop was pulling my complete credit report from all 3 major bureaus. I had checked my credit score occasionally through my banking app, and it was decent, though not great. But I had never ordered the full detailed report that showed every account ever opened in my name. The report that came back looked like it belonged to a completely different person. There were 7 credit cards I had never opened, 2 car loans for vehicles I had never owned, and a personal loan for $25,000 that I definitely had never applied for. Every single fraudulent account showed a perfect payment history, which explained why my credit score hadn't been completely destroyed, but the total credit utilization was enormous. Madison had been systematically opening accounts in my name for years, but she had been smart about it. She kept the balances manageable and made payments on time to avoid raising red flags. The accounts were being used actively, though, which meant she was living off credit lines established with my identity while presenting herself as financially successful to everyone around her. I spent hours on the phone with each credit card company, filing fraud reports and requesting detailed transaction histories. The spending patterns told a clear story: expensive clothing stores, high-end restaurants, luxury travel bookings, and premium beauty services. Madison had been funding her entire lifestyle with my credit lines. But the personal loan was the most devastating discovery. $25,000 had been borrowed in my name 18 months ago and used as a down payment on Madison's luxury apartment. She was literally living in a space I was unknowingly paying for while I struggled to afford my shared rental. The paper trail was extensive and damning. Every application showed forged signatures that matched my handwriting style perfectly. Madison had been practicing my signature for years, probably since we were teenagers sharing homework and family documents. As I dug deeper into the fraud investigation, I realized Madison's manipulation extended far beyond financial theft. Each credit application included employment verification, and the contact information listed for my supposed employers was always a phone number that traced back to Madison's various phone lines. She had been impersonating my employers to verify fake employment information. She'd been creating an entire fictional version of my life where I was financially reckless but professionally successful enough to qualify for large credit lines. The level of sophistication was staggering. But the most chilling discovery came when I cross-referenced the dates of these fraudulent account openings with my own life events. Madison had opened the largest credit line just 2 weeks after my college graduation. The personal loan was approved the same month I got my promotion at work. Every time something good happened in my real life, Madison celebrated by stealing my identity to improve her fake life. I also found evidence that went beyond financial fraud. Madison had been intercepting my mail by filing change of address forms that redirected certain types of correspondence to her apartment. Important financial documents, tax forms, and legal notices that should have come to me were being sent to her address instead. She'd also been monitoring my credit actively, which is how she knew exactly how much credit capacity was available in my name at any given time. She had set up account alerts for my real credit cards, so she would know immediately if I started investigating my own financial situation. The level of planning and ongoing maintenance required for this fraud scheme was mind-boggling. Madison had essentially been living a double life where she was both herself and a fictional version of me that existed only on financial paperwork. By the end of that day, I had documented evidence of identity theft, credit fraud, forgery, mail fraud, and wire fraud. Madison hadn't just been playing family favorites. She had been committing multiple felonies that could land her in federal prison for decades. But I still had the feeling I was only seeing part of the picture. If Madison was capable of this level of systematic fraud, what else had she been doing to sabotage my life while building her own success? After discovering the full scope of Madison's financial crimes, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating: complete radio silence. No explanations, no confrontations, no dramatic announcements. I simply disappeared from their lives without a single word of warning. I blocked every family member on every platform I could think of. Phone numbers, social media accounts, email addresses, even their Netflix sharing access got cut off. I changed my own phone number and didn't give the new one to anyone who might pass it along. I deactivated my Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts entirely, creating new private profiles under a slightly different name that none of them could find. The silence was immediate and absolute. For the first week, it felt like holding my breath underwater. Every fiber of my being wanted to check if they had noticed, if they were trying to reach me, if they cared that I had vanished from their world. But I forced myself to stay strong and maintain the blackout. What I didn't expect was how quickly I could monitor their reactions without them knowing. I created fake social media accounts with generic names and photos, just enough to watch their public posts from a distance. What I saw was both exactly what I predicted and somehow worse than I had imagined. At first, there was nothing. For 3 whole days, none of them seemed to notice I was gone. Madison kept posting her usual stream of luxury lifestyle content. Mom shared her typical recipe videos and inspirational quotes. Dad posted his weekend golf photos. It was like I had never existed in the first place. But on day 4, something shifted. Madison posted a cryptic message that made my stomach turn. When family members struggle with mental health, sometimes the kindest thing is to give them space to heal, praying for those who are lost right now. She was already crafting a narrative. In Madison's version of events, my disappearance wasn't a justified response to years of fraud and manipulation. It was evidence of my mental instability, something that required family patience and understanding rather than accountability. By the end of the first week, Madison's social media had transformed into a masterclass in victim manipulation. She posted daily thoughts and prayers, messages about family members going through dark times. She shared articles about supporting loved ones with depression and anxiety. She even posted a photo of herself lighting a candle with the caption, "For those who are struggling in silence." The comments from her friends were exactly what she was fishing for. "You're such a caring sister. Your family is lucky to have someone so understanding. It must be so hard to watch someone you love self-destruct." Madison was using my absence to build sympathy for herself while simultaneously painting me as mentally unstable. She was getting praise for being patient with my supposed breakdown while never actually acknowledging that she had no idea where I was or why I had left. But the most disturbing post came at the end of week 2. Madison shared a long, heartfelt message about how some people create their own problems and then blame others when their choices have consequences. She talked about the importance of taking responsibility for your actions instead of running away from reality. She was positioning my disappearance as proof that I was running away from my financial irresponsibility rather than confronting her theft. In Madison's narrative, I was the problem that needed fixing, not the victim who needed justice. My parents started sharing Madison's posts with supportive comments. Mom wrote things like, So proud of your maturity during this difficult time. Dad added comments about how family love means being patient with those who are struggling. They were all rallying around Madison, treating her like the long-suffering victim of my supposed mental health crisis. Meanwhile, none of them had apparently tried very hard to actually locate me or find out if I was safe. They seemed more interested in supporting each other through my absence than in understanding why I had left. The most telling detail was that none of their posts actually asked me to come back or expressed concern about my well-being. They weren't looking for me. They were processing my departure as confirmation of problems they already believed I had. By week 3, Madison's manipulation had reached new heights. She posted photos of herself cleaning out what she claimed was my old bedroom, donating clothes and belongings to charity. The caption read, "Sometimes loving someone means letting go of the things they've left behind, creating space for healing and new beginnings." She was literally erasing evidence of my existence in the family home while framing it as an act of love, and my parents were commenting with heart emojis and supportive messages about her selfless efforts to help me start fresh. Watching this unfold from a distance was both validating and heartbreaking. It confirmed everything I had suspected about the family dynamics, but it also showed me just how expendable I had always been. They weren't devastated by my absence. They weren't desperately searching for me. They were actually relieved to have a simple explanation for why the family scapegoat had finally disappeared. But Madison's panic was becoming evident to anyone paying close attention. Her posts were becoming more frequent and more desperate. She was working overtime to control the narrative because she knew that without me around to blame, people might start looking more closely at her own behavior. The cracks were already starting to show. Some of her friends were asking direct questions in the comments. Have you actually talked to Claire? Do you know if she's safe? Madison's responses were always vague and deflective. We're respecting her need for space right now. By the end of week 3, I realized that my silence was accomplishing exactly what I had hoped. Madison was spiraling. My parents were enabling her spiral, and their public behavior was creating a permanent record of how they handled family crisis. When the truth eventually came out, no one would be able to claim they had been supportive or concerned family members. But I had no idea that Madison's desperation was about to drive her to even more extreme measures to maintain control over the situation. Week 4 of my silent treatment brought an unexpected phone call that changed everything. Jenny Martinez, one of my closest work colleagues, reached out to my new phone number with information that made my blood run cold. "Claire, I really need to talk to you about something that happened at work," Jenny said during our lunch meeting at a coffee shop far from our office building. "I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but with everything going on with your family's situation, I think you need to know." Jenny had been my cubicle neighbor for 2 years. She was one of the few people at work who knew about my family dynamics, and she had always been genuinely supportive of my career goals. What she told me that day explained so many workplace mysteries that had been haunting me for years. "About 6 months ago, I was working late and answered your desk phone by mistake," Jenny began. "The caller identified herself as your sister and said she was calling with urgent family medical information that needed to be passed along to your supervisor." My stomach dropped. "What kind of medical information?" "She said you had been struggling with substance abuse issues and that the family was concerned about your reliability at work. She claimed you had been hiding relapses and that they wanted to make sure your employer was aware in case your performance started declining." The coffee shop suddenly felt too hot and too loud. Madison had been sabotaging my professional reputation for months, maybe years, and I had never known. Jenny continued. "I told her that wasn't really appropriate information for me to handle and that she should contact HR directly if there were legitimate concerns. But she was very insistent, very emotional, talking about how much the family loved you and wanted to protect your job by giving advance warning about potential problems." "Did you report this to anyone?" "I mentioned it to Sarah in HR, but she said there wasn't much they could do unless you brought up the situation yourself or there were actual performance issues to address. But Claire, I think there have been other calls. Jenny explained that several people in our department had mentioned receiving strange calls from family members asking about my work schedule, my reliability, my relationships with supervisors. The calls were always framed as concern from loving family members who wanted to help me succeed professionally. I started paying attention after that first call, Jenny said. I think someone has been calling regularly, maybe once every few months, always with some new concern about your mental health, your reliability, or your professional judgment. This explained so much about my career trajectory that had never made sense. I was a strong performer with excellent reviews, but I had been passed over for promotions multiple times. Supervisors would give me positive feedback in private, but seemed hesitant to give me additional responsibilities or recommend me for advancement opportunities. There's something else, Jenny said, looking uncomfortable. Last week, after you stopped coming to work, someone called pretending to be you. They spoke to Mr. Thompson directly and gave some kind of explanation about needing extended family leave for mental health reasons. Mr. Thompson was our department head, and he had the authority to approve extended leave without much paperwork if the situation seemed urgent. Madison had called my workplace, impersonated me, and essentially quit my job on my behalf. Did Thompson believe it was really me? He seemed to. The caller knew details about your recent projects and mentioned specific conversations you'd had with him about workload concerns. It was convincing enough that he approved immediate family medical leave and told everyone not to contact you during your recovery period. Madison had been methodically destroying my professional reputation for years, feeding my supervisors carefully crafted concerns that made me look unreliable and emotionally unstable. Every missed promotion, every hesitation from management, every sense I had that people were treating me differently than my performance warranted, it all traced back to Madison's interference. But the most devastating part was how sophisticated her approach had been. She never made accusations that could be easily disproven. Instead, she planted seeds of doubt that grew over time, making supervisors unconsciously hesitant to trust me with important responsibilities. Jenny, I need you to know that none of those calls were legitimate. Madison has been systematically sabotaging my career while stealing my identity for financial fraud. I've been gathering evidence, and this is just one more piece of a much larger pattern. Jenny's eyes widened as I explained the inheritance theft, the credit fraud, and the family manipulation. By the end of our conversation, she was furious on my behalf and eager to help me document the workplace sabotage. I can get you names and dates of everyone who received those calls, she offered, and I can connect you with people in other departments who might have had similar experiences. Over the next few days, Jenny helped me piece together a timeline of Madison's workplace interference that stretched back nearly 3 years. She had been calling my office regularly sometimes, pretending to be me, sometimes pretending to be a concerned family member, always with the goal of undermining my professional credibility. The pattern was eerily similar to her financial fraud. Madison would research my work projects and gather enough legitimate information to sound credible, then use that information to plant doubts about my reliability and judgment. She had told my supervisors I was struggling with anxiety, depression, family stress, financial problems, and substance abuse. She had created a narrative where I was barely holding my life together and could not be trusted with important responsibilities or advancement opportunities. But just like with the family manipulation, Madison had been careful never to cross lines that would trigger formal investigations. She presented herself as a loving sister, trying to help rather than someone actively sabotaging my career. The realization that Madison had been systematically destroying both my family relationships and my professional opportunities left me feeling completely violated. She hadn't just been stealing my money. She had been stealing my future, one carefully planned phone call at a time. But it also gave me another crucial piece of evidence for the growing case against her. Madison's workplace interference could be documented through phone records and witness testimony, adding multiple counts of fraud and impersonation to her growing list of crimes. As I prepared to dig even deeper into Madison's web of lies, I realized that her desperation to control my professional reputation probably meant there were other areas of my life she had been manipulating without my knowledge. The workplace revelations made me paranoid about what other aspects of my life Madison might have been controlling without my knowledge. That paranoia turned out to be completely justified when I went for what should have been a routine doctor's appointment. I had been avoiding medical care for months because money was tight, but a persistent cough finally forced me to visit Dr. Kim's office for what I hoped would be a quick prescription for antibiotics. Instead, I found myself in the middle of another devastating discovery about Madison's fraud. "I'm sorry, Miss Claire, but there seems to be a problem with your insurance," the receptionist Carol said after typing my information into their computer system. "Our system shows that your coverage was terminated 6 months ago." This was impossible. I had been paying premiums automatically through payroll deduction for 3 years. My insurance was supposed to be active until at least the end of the year. "Can you double-check that I've been paying premiums regularly through my employer?" Carol spent several minutes clicking through screens before giving me a confused look. "Actually, this is very strange. Our records show that you've been using your insurance regularly over the past 6 months, but for services you never received here. And the coverage shows as both active and terminated, depending on which screen I'm looking at." She printed out a detailed insurance activity report that made my blood run cold. According to my insurance company's records, I had been receiving extensive medical services for the past 18 months that I had never actually received. Dermatology appointments, cosmetic procedures, luxury spa treatments, even expensive dental work all billed to my insurance under my name and social security number. "This shows you had a nose job 3 months ago," Carol said, clearly confused, as she looked at my obviously unaltered nose, "and laser hair removal treatments every month for the past year." Madison's emergency surgery that had disrupted my apartment warming party wasn't just cosmetic surgery. It was cosmetic surgery that she had fraudulently billed to my insurance, while telling my parents it was a medical emergency that required their immediate support. I spent the rest of that afternoon on the phone with my insurance company uncovering a systematic scheme that was even more sophisticated than the credit fraud. Madison had somehow gained access to my insurance account and had been using my coverage for expensive treatments while simultaneously working to remove me as the primary beneficiary. The insurance representative, Mrs. Patterson, walked me through months of fraudulent claims with growing concern in her voice. "Miss, I have to tell you, this appears to be a very sophisticated insurance fraud operation. Someone has been using your insurance information while also filing paperwork to gradually transfer your coverage to another individual." Madison had been slowly but systematically transferring my health insurance benefits to herself. She started by adding herself as an emergency contact with access to account information, then gradually escalated her access levels until she could file claims and make coverage changes. "The most concerning part," Mrs. Patterson continued, "is that there are medical debt collections being filed against your name for services that your insurance only partially covered. You currently owe about $12,000 in medical debt for treatments you apparently never received." Madison hadn't just been stealing my insurance coverage. She had been leaving me responsible for the bills from her luxury medical treatments. Every cosmetic procedure, every spa treatment, every expensive dermatology appointment had been partially billed to my insurance and partially billed to me personally. But the cruelest part of the scheme was that Madison had timed the insurance termination to coincide with my extended absence from work. She knew that when I eventually tried to use my insurance again, I would discover both the fraud and the debt at the same time when I was least financially equipped to deal with either problem. The medical debt was already affecting my credit score, adding another layer to the financial damage Madison had inflicted on my life. She had essentially trapped me in a cycle where I couldn't afford medical care because I was being held responsible for medical care I had never received. Mrs. Patterson explained that resolving insurance fraud cases typically took months and required extensive documentation and investigation. In the meantime, I would be responsible for paying out of pocket for any medical care I actually needed, while fighting to clear debt for medical care I had never received. However, she added, the documentation of this fraud is very clear. Whoever did this left extensive paper trails and electronic records. This isn't a case where we'll have trouble proving fraud occurred. The evidence is overwhelming. I requested copies of every fraudulent claim, every forged authorization, and every account change Madison had made. The paper trail was indeed extensive and damning. Madison had been using my insurance as her personal luxury health care fund for almost 2 years. But the medical fraud also revealed something else that chilled me to the bone. Madison had been receiving psychological counseling and psychiatric medications under my insurance coverage. She was literally getting mental health treatment for the psychological stress of maintaining her fraud schemes and billing that treatment to the very person she was defrauding. The therapy session notes, which I could access as the primary insurance holder, painted a picture of Madison struggling with guilt and anxiety about family financial situations and managing difficult relationships with siblings. She was getting professional help for the emotional impact of destroying my life, while continuing to destroy my life. As I sat in that doctor's office staring at months of fraudulent medical claims that Madison had billed to my insurance, I realized that her manipulation had reached into literally every aspect of my existence. She wasn't just stealing my money, sabotaging my career, and manipulating my family relationships. She was stealing my health care while leaving me responsible for paying her bills. But the medical fraud also gave me hope. Healthcare fraud is a federal crime that leaves extensive paper trails and involves multiple institutional victims. Insurance companies take fraud very seriously and have entire departments dedicated to investigation and prosecution. Madison's greed had finally led her to commit crimes that couldn't be explained away as family misunderstandings or sister miscommunications. She had defrauded major corporations in ways that would trigger serious legal consequences regardless of our family dynamics. 6 weeks into my silent treatment, I realized I needed to retrieve some personal belongings from my childhood bedroom at my parents' house. Important documents, family photos that belonged to me, and sentimental items that I couldn't replace were still sitting in that house with people who had proven they couldn't be trusted. I waited until I knew both parents would be at work and Madison would be busy with her Tuesday morning yoga class, a routine she had maintained religiously for years, according to her social media posts. I still had my key to the house, and I figured a quick 20-minute retrieval mission would be simple and drama-free. What I found when I opened the door to my old bedroom nearly brought me to my knees. The room was completely empty, not just cleaned out, but stripped down to bare walls and carpet. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every personal item I had accumulated over 28 years of life was gone. It looked like a room that had never been occupied. I stood in that empty doorway for several minutes trying to process what I was seeing. Madison hadn't just taken a few things or reorganized the space. She had systematically removed every trace of my existence from the family home. My first thought was that maybe my parents had converted the room for another purpose and stored my belongings somewhere else in the house. I spent an hour searching every closet, every storage area, every possible space where boxes of my things might have been moved. Nothing. Absolutely nothing remained of the life I had built in that house over nearly 3 decades. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had lived next door for 15 years and always kept a friendly eye on neighborhood activities. What she told me explained everything and broke my heart simultaneously. "Oh, honey, I wondered about all those trips to Goodwill," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Your sister has been making donations every few days for the past month. Always said she was helping you declutter and start fresh. I thought it was sweet how much time she was spending helping you organize your things." Madison had been systematically selling or donating everything I owned while telling the neighbors it was a collaborative effort to help me start fresh. She had spent weeks carefully removing every trace of my existence from the family home while presenting it to everyone as an act of sisterly love. Did she take everything, even personal papers and family photos? She was very careful about it, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Always had boxes and bags, never just threw things away. She said you wanted to make sure everything went to people who could really use it. The violation felt even deeper than the financial fraud. Madison had stolen my money and my credit, but those were abstract things that could eventually be restored. She had stolen physical pieces of my history that could never be replaced. I drove to the closest Goodwill location and asked to speak with a manager about recent donations. The manager, Mr. Peterson, was sympathetic, but couldn't help much. We get donations all day, every day, he explained. Unless there was something specific you were looking for, it would be almost impossible to track down items from a particular donor. And anything that came in more than a week ago has probably already been sold or transferred to other locations. But he did remember Madison. Actually, yes, there was a young woman who's been coming in regularly with very nice donations. Designer clothes, expensive jewelry, electronics. She always said it was from a family member who was downsizing. My grandmother's jewelry, my laptop from college, the designer clothes I had saved up to buy for job interviews. Madison had taken everything valuable and donated it before I could retrieve it. Do you remember anything specific about the jewelry donations? Mr. Peterson's face brightened. Oh yes, there was a beautiful vintage jewelry collection. The donor was very specific that it should go to our auction program for higher value items. She said it belonged to her grandmother, and she wanted to make sure it raised good money for our programs. My grandmother's jewelry collection, which was supposed to come to me according to her will, had been donated to Goodwill's auction program. Madison had not only stolen irreplaceable family heirlooms, but she had made sure I could never recover them by putting them into a system where they would be sold to strangers. I spent the rest of that day calling pawn shops, consignment stores, and secondhand dealers in a 20-mile radius trying to track down pieces of my own life. A few shop owners remembered Madison always describing her as a friendly young woman who was helping a family member declutter. At a high-end consignment shop downtown, I found some of my college textbooks and a few pieces of jewelry that hadn't sold yet. The shop owner, Maria, was horrified when I explained the situation. She had documentation for everything, Maria said, pulling out Madison's consignment agreement. Look, she signed as the owner and provided ID. I had no reason to think the items weren't legitimately hers. The consignment agreement showed Madison's name and signature, but listed my childhood address as her residence. She had been using our family home as proof of ownership for my possessions while systematically selling everything I had worked to acquire over the years. Maria let me repurchase my own belongings at cost, but most of my things had already been sold to customers who had no idea they were buying stolen property. The cruelest part was that Madison had been making money from this theft. The consignment shop records showed that she had earned over $3,000 selling my clothes, jewelry, and electronics. She wasn't just erasing my presence from the family home, she was profiting from the erasure. As I drove home with the few items I had been able to recover, I realized that Madison's theft had extended beyond money and credit into the realm of emotional terrorism. She had deliberately destroyed irreplaceable pieces of my personal history, knowing that these violations could never be fully undone. But she had also made another critical mistake. Property theft, especially when it involves forged documentation and fraudulent consignment agreements, creates paper trails and institutional records that would be crucial for building a criminal case. Madison's greed and cruelty had driven her to commit crimes that went far beyond financial fraud into the realm of emotional destruction that no court would view sympathetically. 2 months into my silent treatment, I received a phone call that revealed another layer of Madison's systematic isolation campaign. My cousin Emma, who I had been close to throughout childhood, somehow tracked down my new phone number with devastating news. "Claire, I am so confused and hurt right now," Emma said, her voice thick with tears. "I tried to reach out to you 100 times about my wedding, and Madison finally told me you said you want nothing to do with our family anymore." Emma was getting married in 2 weeks in a beautiful destination ceremony in Napa Valley. We had talked about her engagement months earlier, and she had mentioned wanting me to play a special role in the wedding. I had been looking forward to celebrating with her, but I had never received any invitation or communication about wedding plans. Emma, I never received any wedding invitation. I didn't even know you had set a date. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Emma spoke again, her voice was shaking. Claire, I sent you the save the date 8 months ago. I mailed the official invitation to your parents' house 4 months ago. I called, I texted, I even tried messaging you on social media. When I never heard back, I was heartbroken. But Madison explained that you were going through a difficult time and had asked the family to handle your social obligations until you felt better. My stomach dropped as the familiar pattern of Madison's manipulation became clear. She had intercepted Emma's wedding communications and had been managing Emma's expectations about my participation while never telling me anything about the wedding. Emma, what exactly did Madison tell you about my situation? She said you were struggling with some personal issues and had asked her to handle family communications for a while. She said you felt overwhelmed by social obligations and needed space to focus on getting your life together. When the RSVP deadline passed without hearing from you, Madison offered to take your place as maid of honor, so I wouldn't have to scramble to find a replacement. Madison had stolen my role as maid of honor in Emma's wedding, while convincing Emma that I had voluntarily withdrawn from family relationships. She had positioned herself as the supportive family member, stepping in to help while painting me as unreliable and emotionally unstable. Did Madison show you any actual communication from me, saying I didn't want to participate? No, she said you had asked her to handle everything verbally because you were too stressed to deal with wedding planning details. She was actually really sweet about it, talking about how much she wanted to help both of us during a difficult time. Emma had been planning her dream wedding, believing that her close cousin had abandoned her during one of the most important events of her life. Meanwhile, Madison had been happily planning to serve as maid of honor, probably enjoying the attention and special treatment that came with the role. Emma Madison has been systematically lying to our entire family and stealing my identity for financial fraud. I never asked her to handle any communications, and I definitely never said I didn't want to participate in your wedding. I spent the next hour explaining the full scope of Madison's manipulation and fraud to Emma, who was horrified and furious on my behalf. Oh my God, Claire, the wedding is in 2 weeks. Madison has been involved in all the planning. She's organized the bachelorette party. She's in all the photos from the bridal showers. How do I even fix this? The practical complications were overwhelming, but the emotional damage was even worse. Emma had spent months believing I didn't care about her happiness, while I had spent months wondering why my extended family had stopped including me in important family events. There's something else you should know, Emma said quietly. Madison has been telling everyone at family gatherings that you're going through a mental health crisis and that the family is trying to give you space to recover. Everyone thinks you're having some kind of breakdown, and that's why you've been absent from family events. Madison had been using my absence from one family event to justify my absence from all family events, creating a snowball effect where my isolation from the family appeared to be my own choice, rather than the result of her systematic interference. She's been posting on social media about family members who need prayers and support during difficult times. Everyone assumes she's talking about you, and they've all been praising her for being such a caring sister. The wedding revelation made me realize that Madison's manipulation extended far beyond our immediate family into our entire extended family network. She had been managing my relationships with cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends, always positioning herself as my caring representative while ensuring that I was gradually excluded from every important family moment. Emma wanted to immediately uninvite Madison from the wedding and restore my role as maid of honor, but the practical complications made that impossible. Madison had been involved in planning for months. She was financially committed to expensive bridesmaid expenses, and changing plans 2 weeks before the wedding would create chaos for everyone involved. I can't undo the damage Madison has caused to your wedding, I told Emma. but I can make sure she never gets the chance to manipulate another family event. Emma agreed to help me document Madison's wedding manipulation and to serve as a witness to her systematic interference in family relationships. She also promised to gradually share the truth with other family members who had been told I was having a mental health crisis. "I'm so sorry I believed her," Emma said, "but she was so convincing and she seemed genuinely concerned about your well-being. She had explanations for everything and always positioned herself as trying to help." The wedding manipulation was perhaps the most emotionally devastating of Madison's schemes because it had cost me relationships with family members who genuinely cared about me. Unlike my parents, who had chosen to believe Madison's lies about my financial irresponsibility, Emma and other extended family members had been completely innocent victims of Madison's deception. But it also gave me hope. Emma's horror at discovering the truth meant that other family members would likely react the same way once they learned they had been manipulated. Madison's web of lies was becoming too complex to maintain, and the truth was starting to leak out despite her best efforts to control the narrative. As I hung up the phone with Emma, I realized that Madison's desperation to maintain control over my family relationships was probably driving her to take even more extreme measures. Her manipulation was becoming more elaborate and harder to sustain, which meant she was probably making mistakes that would eventually expose everything. 3 months into my investigation, I decided it was time to organize all of my evidence and begin building a formal legal case against Madison. I'd been collecting documentation piece by piece, but I needed to see the full scope of her crimes laid out systematically. I made an appointment with Patricia Williams, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crimes and identity theft cases. Her office was downtown in a gleaming high-rise, and I felt intimidated walking in with my boxes of evidence. But Patricia immediately put me at ease with her professional but warm demeanor. I've seen a lot of identity theft cases over the years, but usually they involve strangers or distant acquaintances, Patricia said as I began explaining my situation. Family-based identity theft is unfortunately more common than people realize, but it's often more devastating because of the emotional manipulation involved. As I walked Patricia through my evidence, her expressions grew increasingly serious. She took detailed notes and asked clarifying questions about timelines, documentation, and potential witnesses. "Claire, what you're describing isn't just financial fraud," she said after reviewing my inheritance theft documentation. "This is a sophisticated criminal enterprise involving multiple federal crimes. The fact that your sister has maintained this operation for years while manipulating family relationships shows a level of premeditation that courts take very seriously." But what Patricia discovered as we organized my evidence was even more damning than I had realized. Hidden in the pile of legal documents I had collected from various fraud investigations was paperwork I had never seen before. "When did you sign this power of attorney document?" Patricia asked, holding up an official-looking legal form. "I've never seen that document before in my life." Patricia's face grew grim as she examined the paperwork more closely. "This gives your sister broad legal authority over your finances and medical decisions during emergency situations. According to this document, you granted her power of attorney 18 months ago. The signature on the power of attorney looked exactly like my handwriting, but I had absolutely no memory of signing any such document." Patricia compared it to legitimate signatures I had provided and shook her head. "This is an extremely sophisticated forgery. Whoever did this had extensive practice copying your signature and access to legal document templates. They also had enough personal information about you to make this document look completely legitimate." The forged power of attorney explained how Madison had been able to access so many of my accounts and make financial decisions on my behalf. Banks and institutions that might have questioned her authority to act on my behalf would have accepted this legal document as proof of her legitimacy. "There's something else," Patricia said, continuing to sort through the legal paperwork. "This document wasn't just forged, it was officially notarized. Do you recognize this notary's name or signature?" I looked at the notary signature and felt the blood drain from my face. That's my sister's college roommate, Jessica Walsh. She became a notary public about 2 years ago. Patricia nodded grimly. So your sister had access to someone who could officially authenticate forged documents. This shows conspiracy to commit fraud involving multiple individuals. As Patricia continued examining my evidence, she found more forged documents that I hadn't even known existed. Madison had created an entire portfolio of legal paperwork that gave her broad authority over my affairs, while making her actions appear completely legitimate to any institution that required documentation. Claire, I need you to understand the seriousness of what we're looking at here, Patricia said. Your sister hasn't just been stealing money or manipulating family relationships. She's been systematically assuming your legal identity in ways that could have permanent consequences for your life. Patricia explained that the forged power of attorney could have been used to make major life decisions on my behalf. Medical decisions, financial commitments, even legal agreements could have been made in my name without my knowledge or consent. The good news is that this level of forgery and legal fraud creates an extensive paper trail that will be very difficult for her to explain or defend. The bad news is that untangling the legal implications of these forged documents could take years and significant legal expenses. Patricia recommended filing formal complaints with multiple agencies: the FBI for identity theft and mail fraud, the State Attorney General's Office for Financial Crimes, and the local district attorney's office for forgery and fraud. She also suggested contacting the State Bar Association about Jessica's role in notarizing fraudulent documents. But before we file any formal complaints, we need to make sure we have documented every aspect of your sister's fraud operation. Once we trigger criminal investigations, she'll likely stop her criminal activity and start trying to cover her tracks. Patricia helped me create a comprehensive timeline of Madison's crimes, organized by category and severity. The scope was staggering: inheritance theft, credit fraud, insurance fraud, property theft, workplace sabotage, family manipulation forgery, and conspiracy involving at least one other individual. In my experience, this level of systematic fraud doesn't happen in isolation, Patricia warned. Your sister has probably been committing similar crimes against other people, possibly for years. Identity thieves who target family members often expand their operations to include friends, acquaintances, and romantic partners. That possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made perfect sense. If Madison was capable of stealing from her own sister for years, she was probably stealing from anyone who trusted her enough to provide access to personal information. I recommend hiring a private investigator to look into your sister's other relationships and financial activities, Patricia suggested. If we can document a broader pattern of fraud and theft, it will strengthen your case and potentially help other victims. As I left Patricia's office, I felt both relief and overwhelming anxiety. Relief because I finally had professional confirmation that Madison's actions were serious crimes that would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Anxiety because I was beginning to understand the full scope of the legal battle ahead of me. But I also felt a sense of empowerment. For the first time since discovering Madison's fraud, I had a clear plan of action and professional support for fighting back. Madison had spent years making me feel like the problem in our family dynamics, but now I had legal confirmation that she was a criminal who had victimized me systematically. The forged legal documents were particularly damning because they showed premeditation and sophistication that went far beyond opportunistic theft. Madison had been planning and executing a long-term criminal operation that required significant time, effort, and criminal intent. As I prepared to move forward with formal legal action, I realized that Madison's world was about to come crashing down in ways she couldn't manipulate or control. After months of collecting evidence and building a legal case, I decided it was time to go public with Madison's crimes. My attorney had advised against posting anything on social media while we prepared our legal filings, but I realized that Madison was continuing to manipulate family and friend narratives through her own social media presence. I created a new public Instagram account with my real name and photo, something Madison could easily find if she was looking for me online. Then I spent an entire weekend crafting a detailed post that laid out every piece of evidence against Madison in a clear, factual timeline. The post began with a simple statement. For anyone wondering where I've been for the past 3 months, here's exactly what happened and why I finally had to cut contact with my family. I included screenshots of bank statements showing the inheritance theft photos of forged documents, with signatures clearly visible, insurance fraud documentation, and even photos of my empty childhood bedroom with timestamps showing when Madison had cleared it out. Each piece of evidence included a detailed explanation of how Madison had committed the crime and how it had affected my life. I was careful to stick to facts and documentation, rather than emotional accusations letting the evidence speak for itself. The post was long, probably too long for typical social media attention spans, but it was thorough and undeniable. I ended with a simple statement. If anyone else has experienced similar manipulation or fraud from Madison, please contact me. This behavior didn't start with me and probably didn't end with me. I posted it on Sunday evening and turned off my phone, not wanting to watch the immediate reactions. When I checked back Monday morning, I was stunned by the response. The post had been shared over 2,000 times within 12 hours. The comments section was filled with people expressing shock support and, most importantly, similar experiences with Madison. Sarah Chen, a girl from Madison's sorority, wrote, "Oh my God, Claire, this explains so much. Madison borrowed my credit card for emergency car repairs junior year and never paid me back. She said her family was helping her handle financial stress and she'd pay me back when things settled down. I never saw that $1,500. Jessica Martinez, who had worked with Madison at her previous job, commented, "Madison convinced me to co-sign an apartment lease for her when she was going through a temporary family financial crisis. She moved out 6 months later and left me responsible for the full rent. I almost lost my credit rating because of her." Even more damaging were the comments from people Madison was currently manipulating. Her current roommate, Ashley, wrote, "Wait, is this why Madison always has packages delivered to our apartment addressed to different names? She said she was helping family members with mail forwarding, but now I'm wondering what's really going on." Kevin Thompson, someone Madison had been dating, casually added, "This is terrifying. Madison has been helping me organize my finances and has access to several of my accounts. I need to check everything immediately." The comments kept coming throughout the day. Friends from high school, college, acquaintances, co-workers, neighbors, even casual dating relationships. Dozens of people sharing stories of Madison manipulating, lying, stealing, or defrauding them in various ways. But the most shocking comments came from family members I hadn't spoken to in months. My Aunt Carol wrote, "Claire, honey, I'm so sorry. Madison told us you were having financial problems and asked if we could help by sending money directly to her to pass along to you. We've been sending her $300 a month for the past year, thinking we were helping you through a difficult time." My Uncle David added, "Madison said you were too proud to accept help directly, so we've been sending money to her to help with your medical bills and living expenses. We had no idea you weren't receiving any of this help." Madison had been running charity scams using my supposed financial and medical crises, collecting money from extended family members who thought they were helping me through difficult times. She was literally fundraising off of problems she had created by stealing from me. Within 24 hours, my post had been shared over 5,000 times and had received hundreds of comments from people sharing their own experiences with Madison's manipulation and fraud. The scope of her criminal activity was far beyond what I had imagined. But the most satisfying part was watching Madison's carefully crafted public image completely crumble in real time. Her own social media followers were sharing my post and asking pointed questions about the discrepancies between her posts about family support and the evidence I had provided. Madison's most recent Instagram posts about supporting family through difficult times were flooded with comments asking if she was the family member causing the difficulties. Her photos from expensive vacations were being questioned by people who now knew she was funding those trips with stolen money. Friends and acquaintances who had been impressed by Madison's apparent success and family devotion were publicly expressing shock and disgust at the documented evidence of her crimes. But Madison herself remained completely silent on social media. No responses, no denials, no attempts to defend herself or explain the evidence. Her silence was more damning than any response could have been. By the end of the week, my post had reached tens of thousands of people and had been picked up by local news outlets as a story about sophisticated family fraud schemes. Madison's name was being mentioned in news articles and shared across social media platforms as an example of how family members can commit serious financial crimes. The viral spread of the evidence meant that Madison couldn't control the narrative anymore. She couldn't explain away the documentation or manipulate people's perceptions when they could see bank records, forged documents, and witness testimony with their own eyes. Most importantly, the public exposure was generating additional evidence and victims that would strengthen any criminal case against Madison. People were coming forward with documentation of their own losses and sharing information about Madison's methods that I never would have discovered otherwise. The social media expose had accomplished exactly what I hoped. It had completely destroyed Madison's ability to manipulate public perception while generating overwhelming evidence of her systematic criminal behavior. Within 48 hours of my social media post going viral, Madison's professional life began to collapse just as dramatically as her personal reputation. Her employer, Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, apparently had a social media monitoring system that flagged when employee names appeared in viral content. The first sign of corporate trouble came when several people commenting on my post identified themselves as Pinnacle employees who recognized Madison's name and were shocked by the allegations. Their comments created a direct link between my fraud documentation and Madison's workplace, making it impossible for her employer to ignore the situation. Janet Rodriguez, who identified herself as working in Pinnacle's HR department, left a comment that made my heart race. If these allegations are true, we need to investigate immediately. We take employee fraud very seriously, especially when it involves identity theft and document forgery. But the corporate investigation revealed problems that went far beyond Madison's personal crimes. According to several Pinnacle employees who reached out to me directly, Madison had been using company resources to facilitate her fraud schemes for years. Tom Mitchell, an IT specialist at Pinnacle, contacted me through private message with devastating information. I manage our computer systems and noticed unusual activity on Madison's work accounts. She's been using company computers to access banking websites, create documents, and even make phone calls that aren't related to her job responsibilities. The IT investigation showed that Madison had been using her work computer to research my personal information, access my accounts, and create forged documents during company time. She had essentially been running her identity theft operation from her office while being paid by her employer. "There's something else," Tom continued. "Madison has been using our company letterhead and official contact information to impersonate legitimate businesses. We found emails she sent to banks and insurance companies identifying herself as representing our company when she was actually trying to access your accounts." Madison had been impersonating her own employer to add legitimacy to her fraud attempts. Banks and institutions were more likely to provide account information to someone calling from a registered business number and providing official company letterhead. Sarah Kim, a marketing coordinator who worked closely with Madison, provided even more damaging information. Madison convinced several of us to help her with what she called family emergency phone calls. She said her sister was going through a mental health crisis and couldn't handle business calls herself, so we helped her contact banks and insurance companies to check on account status for family planning purposes. Madison had manipulated her coworkers into unknowingly participating in her fraud schemes. She had convinced them they were helping with a family crisis when they were actually helping her commit federal crimes. The scope of corporate resource misuse was staggering. Madison had used company phones, computers, printers, internet access, and even employee assistance to facilitate identity theft and financial fraud. She had also forged company documents and misrepresented her employer in communications with financial institutions. Within a week of the viral post, Pinnacle's internal investigation had uncovered enough evidence to terminate Madison immediately and refer her case to law enforcement. The company's legal department was reportedly considering pressing charges for theft of corporate resources and unauthorized use of company identity. But the corporate consequences extended beyond just losing her job. Madison's termination was noted in her employment record as terminated for cause following investigation of criminal activity. This notation would make it nearly impossible for her to find employment in marketing or any field requiring background checks. Jennifer Walsh, Pinnacle's HR director, contacted me directly to provide information for potential criminal proceedings. We want to cooperate fully with any legal action against Madison. Her misuse of company resources and misrepresentation of our business has created potential liability issues for our company. Pinnacle also discovered that Madison had been stealing from her employer in more traditional ways. She had been padding her expense reports, claiming reimbursement for personal purchases, and even using the company credit card for expenses that were actually part of her fraud schemes against me. She claimed thousands of dollars in business expenses that were actually used to fund her identity theft operation, Jennifer explained. Printing costs for forged documents, phone bills for calling your accounts, even travel expenses for trips to banks and legal offices were all billed to our company as legitimate business expenses. The corporate investigation provided crucial documentation for criminal proceedings against Madison. Her employer's evidence showed clear intent to commit fraud, sophisticated planning, and willingness to involve innocent third parties in criminal activity. Most importantly, the corporate consequences meant that Madison could no longer fund her lifestyle or legal defense through her job. She was facing criminal charges while unemployed with damaged professional credentials and with her primary source of income eliminated. The speed with which Madison's professional life collapsed showed how extensively her crimes had infiltrated every aspect of her existence. She hadn't just been stealing from me as a side activity. She had built her entire adult life around systematic fraud that required constant maintenance and escalation. As news of Madison's termination spread through her professional network, more evidence emerged of workplace-related fraud and manipulation that strengthened the growing criminal case against her. The viral social media exposure and corporate investigation had been devastating for Madison. But the real turning point came when federal investigators contacted my parents as part of the expanding identity theft case. Agent Maria Santos from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division called my parents directly not to arrest them, but to inform them that they had been identified as potential witnesses and unknowing accomplices in a federal fraud investigation. Mom called me for the first time in 4 months, her voice shaking with fear and confusion. "Claire, honey, there's an FBI agent here asking questions about financial transactions and legal documents that we apparently signed but don't remember signing. Can you please come over and help us understand what's happening?" I almost hung up on her. After months of being treated like the problem family member, the idea of rushing over to help them navigate the consequences of their enabling behavior felt ridiculous. But Agent Santos had specifically requested my presence as the primary victim, so I drove to my childhood home for what would be the most devastating family confrontation of my life. Agent Santos was a professional, no-nonsense woman in her 40s who immediately took control of the situation. She had boxes of evidence and a timeline that was even more comprehensive than my own documentation. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, I need to walk you through some financial transactions that occurred over the past 3 years, using your names, signatures, and personal information," Agent Santos began. "We have reason to believe you may have been victims of the same fraud scheme that targeted your daughter Claire." The agent showed them bank transfer authorizations, loan applications, and legal documents that bore their signatures, but that they had no memory of signing. Madison had been forging their signatures as well as mine, using their identities to facilitate her fraud schemes. This loan application for $25,000 was signed with your authorization as co-signers. Agent Santos explained, showing Dad a document with his signature. Do you remember applying for this loan or agreeing to guarantee your daughter Madison's debt? Dad stared at the document with growing horror. I've never seen this paperwork before in my life. That looks like my signature, but I absolutely did not sign this. Mom examined her own forged signature on several financial documents, her face growing pale as she realized the extent of Madison's manipulation. Mrs. Patterson, these insurance benefit transfer forms show your authorization to redirect Claire's medical coverage to Madison's name. Do you remember signing these forms? No, absolutely not, Mom whispered. Madison said she was helping Claire with paperwork during her mental health crisis, but I never signed anything transferring insurance benefits. Agent Santos had phone records showing that calls had been made from my parents' home phone number to various financial institutions providing authorization for account changes and financial transfers. Madison had been using their home phone to impersonate them while they were at work accessing accounts and making financial decisions in their names. The most serious issue is this power of attorney document. Agent Santos continued showing them the forged paperwork that gave Madison broad authority over my affairs. This document required notarization, and the notary has confirmed that you, Mrs. Patterson, were present and provided identification when this document was notarized. Mom's face went completely white. I was never at any notary appointment. I have never seen this document before. Agent Santos explained that Madison had used fake identification in Mom's name to authenticate forged documents. She had created false identification documents using Mom's personal information and had used those documents to officially notarize fraudulent legal paperwork. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, you need to understand that your daughter Madison has been systematically using your identities to commit federal crimes for at least 3 years. You haven't just been enabling her manipulation of family relationships. You've been unknowing victims of identity theft and fraud. The revelation that they had been victims rather than willing participants in Madison's schemes completely changed my parents' understanding of the family dynamics. They realized they hadn't been protecting Madison's privacy or respecting my supposed mental health needs. They had been manipulated into participating in federal crimes. Dad broke down completely when Agent Santos showed him evidence that Madison had used his identity to open credit accounts and take out loans that he was legally responsible for paying. His credit rating had been damaged by accounts he never knew existed. We thought we were protecting Claire from financial irresponsibility, he sobbed. Madison showed us evidence that Claire was making poor financial decisions, and we believed her because we wanted to help both of our daughters. Mom was devastated by the realization that the evidence of my supposed financial irresponsibility had been created by Madison using stolen identity and forged documents. Every credit card statement, every financial document Madison showed us as proof of Claire's problems was actually evidence of Madison's crimes. She said, finally understanding the full scope of the manipulation. Agent Santos explained that their cooperation would be essential for prosecuting Madison successfully, but that they would likely not face criminal charges themselves since they had been victims rather than willing participants. However, you need to understand that untangling the financial damage Madison has caused to your family will require years of legal work and significant financial costs. She hasn't just stolen money, she's created complex legal liabilities that affect all of you. As Agent Santos packed up her evidence to leave, she turned to my parents with a serious expression. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, based on our investigation, your daughter Madison is facing multiple federal charges that could result in decades in prison. The sophistication and duration of her fraud schemes, combined with the number of victims involved, make this a very serious case. For the first time in my adult life, my parents saw me as the victim rather than the problem. But their awakening to Madison's manipulation had come at a devastating cost to all of us. 8 months after my initial discovery of Madison's inheritance theft, we were finally approaching some kind of resolution. Madison was facing federal charges and had agreed to a plea bargain that included full financial restitution and cooperation with ongoing investigations into her broader fraud schemes. The legal process had been exhausting and expensive, but my attorney, Patricia Williams, had been excellent at navigating the complex financial recovery procedures. Insurance companies, banks, and even Madison's former employer were contributing to restitution funds that would eventually restore most of my financial losses. But the most unexpected development came when Madison herself reached out through her attorney, requesting a family meeting. She claimed she wanted to make amends and provide information that could help with everyone's financial recovery. Against my better judgment and on Patricia's advice that Madison might have information relevant to other aspects of the case, I agreed to meet with Madison, my parents, and both attorneys in Patricia's office. I hadn't seen Madison in over 8 months, and she looked completely different. The polished, confident sister I remembered had been replaced by someone who looked exhausted, defeated, and genuinely remorseful. "Claire, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it." Madison began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to know that everything I did started as a way to help our family, and it spiraled completely out of control." What Madison revealed in that conference room was another shocking layer to an already devastating story. She explained that her initial theft of my inheritance money wasn't just greed or favoritism. It was an attempt to cover up Dad's gambling addiction that had put the family in serious financial danger. 3 years ago, Dad owed $47,000 to various gambling debts, and he was getting threatened by collectors. Madison said, looking directly at Dad, "Mom didn't know about any of it, and Dad was terrified of losing the house and destroying the family financially." Dad's face confirmed what Madison was saying. He'd been hiding a serious gambling problem that had escalated to dangerous debt levels, with loan sharks and illegal gambling operations. Madison came to me when she found out about the debt. Dad admitted, his voice heavy with shame. She offered to help by temporarily managing Claire's inheritance money to pay off the gambling debts and get me into treatment programs. Madison's revelation explained the sophisticated financial schemes and the involvement of other people in her fraud operation. She hadn't been stealing my money to fund a luxury lifestyle. She'd been stealing it to cover Dad's gambling debts while enabling his addiction and hiding the family financial crisis from Mom and me. But Dad's gambling problem didn't stop, Madison continued. Even after I paid off his initial debts, he kept gambling and creating new problems. I kept having to find more money to cover new debts, and that's when I started opening credit accounts and taking loans in everyone's names. The identity theft, the forged documents, the workplace fraud, all of it had escalated from Madison's initial attempt to secretly solve Dad's gambling addiction without destroying the family. I convinced myself that I was protecting everyone by handling the crisis quietly, Madison said. But every time I thought I had solved the problem, Dad would create new gambling debts that required more extreme solutions. Mom was horrified to learn that both her daughters and her husband had been living with this enormous secret for years, while she remained completely unaware of the family's financial danger. "Why didn't anyone tell me what was happening?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "Because I was ashamed," Dad said, "and because Madison convinced me that we could handle it without devastating you and Claire." Madison's attorney, Robert Chen, had encouraged this revelation because it established mitigating circumstances that might reduce her federal sentencing. Family crisis intervention, even when handled criminally, was viewed more sympathetically than pure greed-based fraud. But Madison's confession also opened new avenues for financial recovery. Dad's gambling addiction was covered under family insurance policies that included provisions for addiction-related financial damage. The insurance recovery could help offset some of the restitution requirements. "There's something else," Madison said, looking directly at me. "I kept detailed records of every transaction because I always intended to pay back everything I took. I have documentation that will help recover money from Dad's gambling debts and insurance claims that could actually leave you better off financially than you were before any of this started. Madison had been maintaining parallel financial records that tracked both her theft and Dad's gambling-related losses. Her obsessive documentation of the family financial crisis would actually help maximize our recovery through insurance claims and gambling addiction recovery programs. Over the next several weeks, Madison's cooperation with investigators led to the recovery of assets we didn't even know existed. Her detailed records helped track down money that Dad had lost to gambling operations that were themselves under federal investigation. Madison's documentation is actually helping us recover funds from organized gambling operations that are being prosecuted separately, Patricia explained. Her records are providing evidence that's helping investigators trace money through criminal gambling networks. The family reconciliation process was complicated and painful, but it was happening gradually as we all worked together to untangle the financial and legal mess that Madison's actions had created. Dad entered treatment for gambling addiction and began making amends for his role in enabling Madison's crimes. Mom started family counseling to process her feelings about being kept in the dark about massive family problems. Madison was facing 18 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, but her cooperation and restitution efforts had significantly reduced her potential sentence. More importantly, her genuine remorse and detailed confession had finally given us the truth about why our family had been so dysfunctional for years. The revelation that Madison's manipulation had started as misguided family loyalty rather than pure selfishness didn't excuse her crimes, but it helped explain how someone could escalate from small lies to federal fraud while genuinely believing they were protecting their family. As we worked through the complex process of financial recovery and family healing, I realized that Madison's confession had finally given us the foundation for building honest relationships based on truth rather than manipulation and secrets. 1 year later, I'm sitting in my own apartment, genuinely my own for the first time in my adult life, celebrating my 29th birthday with people who actually know and value the real me. The transformation has been remarkable, not just in my circumstances, but in my understanding of my own worth and my family's capacity for change. The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. Between Madison's restitution payments, insurance claims related to Dad's gambling addiction, recovered funds from federal investigations of gambling operations, and restored inheritance payments with interest, I not only recovered what was stolen but actually improved my financial situation significantly. I used part of the settlement money to complete a professional certification program that led to a promotion at work. My new supervisor, Jessica Martinez, reviewed my employment history and was appalled by the damage Madison's interference had caused to my career trajectory. Based on your actual performance records and the documentation of workplace sabotage, you should have been promoted years ago, Jessica told me during my performance review. We're backdating your promotion and adjusting your salary to reflect what you should have been earning if your career hadn't been deliberately sabotaged. My professional reputation has been completely restored, and I've become something of a workplace advocate for employees who might be experiencing family-based identity theft or sabotage. HR departments are more aware now of how family members can damage employee reputations through strategic lies and manipulation. Madison served 14 months in federal prison and is now completing her supervised probation while working in a retail job and making monthly restitution payments. Her cooperation with federal investigators led to prosecution of several larger fraud operations, and her case has become a teaching example in law enforcement training programs. But the most surprising development has been Madison's genuine transformation during her incarceration and probation. She completed extensive therapy programs addressing family manipulation patterns and has become an advocate for fraud victims' rights. I know I can never undo the damage I caused, Madison told me during one of our court-supervised family therapy sessions, but I want to spend the rest of my life helping other families recognize manipulation patterns before they escalate to criminal behavior. Madison now speaks at community programs about family financial abuse and works with nonprofit organizations that help identity theft victims navigate recovery processes. Her detailed understanding of fraud techniques, combined with her personal experience as a perpetrator, has made her unexpectedly effective at helping other victims. Our relationship will never be the same as it was before I discovered her crimes, but we've built something new based on honesty, accountability, and mutual respect for boundaries. Madison respects my need for limited contact and financial independence, while I've learned to appreciate her genuine efforts to make amends through service to other victims. Dad completed treatment for gambling addiction and has been attending regular support meetings for over a year. His recovery process included making detailed amends to both Madison and me for his role in creating the family crisis that led to her criminal behavior. "I realize now that my gambling addiction didn't just affect me," he told our family therapist. "It created a family emergency that enabled Madison to justify increasingly extreme measures to protect the family secret. My addiction was the foundation for all the other problems that followed." Dad's recovery has been genuine and sustained. He's become active in gambling addiction support networks and has been helpful to other families dealing with addiction-related financial crises. His openness about his problems has actually strengthened his relationship with Mom and created space for more honest family communication. Mom has been the most changed by this whole experience. Learning that she had been completely unaware of massive family problems for years forced her to confront her own role in family communication patterns that enabled secrets and manipulation. "I realize now that I was so focused on keeping peace in the family that I ignored signs that things weren't actually peaceful." Mom reflected during one of our therapy sessions. "I thought being supportive meant not asking difficult questions, but actually it meant I wasn't really supporting anyone." Mom now maintains individual relationships with both Madison and me, respecting our different needs and communication styles, rather than trying to force family harmony that ignores real problems and differences. The family therapy process has been challenging but productive. We've learned to communicate directly about problems rather than managing each other's emotions through manipulation or secrets. We've established clear financial boundaries and transparency requirements that prevent anyone from making major financial decisions affecting other family members without explicit consent. Most importantly, we've all learned to recognize manipulation tactics and to address them directly rather than enabling them for the sake of family harmony. My extended family relationships have also been restored and strengthened. Emma and I are closer now than we were before the wedding situation, and she's become one of my strongest advocates for healthy family communication. Watching your family work through this crisis honestly has actually helped me improve communication in my own marriage, Emma told me recently. "I've learned to address problems directly rather than avoiding conflict and hoping things will improve on their own." The social media exposure led to connections with other family fraud victims that have become lasting friendships. We've created an informal support network for people navigating identity theft recovery and family reconciliation processes. As I sat reflecting on this incredible year of transformation, I realized that Madison's crimes, as devastating as they were, had actually forced our entire family to confront dysfunction patterns that had been undermining all our relationships for decades. The crisis had given us the opportunity to build something better based on honesty, accountability, and genuine respect for each other's autonomy and dignity. My birthday celebration this year included work colleagues who respect my professional abilities, friends who know my actual personality, rather than Madison's manipulated version of me, and family members who've proven their commitment to honest relationships. As I blew out the candles on my birthday cake surrounded by people who truly know and support me, I realized that discovering Madison's betrayal had been the most painful and most liberating experience of my life. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most accidentally give us the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to discover our own strength and to build authentic relationships based on truth rather than manipulation. For anyone who might be reading this and recognizing similar patterns in your own family relationships, I want you to know that you deserve better than manipulation disguised as love. You deserve relationships based on honesty, respect, and genuine care for your well-being. Have you ever felt like the problem family member when you were actually the victim of systematic manipulation? I'd love to hear your stories and experiences in the comments below. Please like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family manipulation, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in these experiences. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that supports truth and healing over manipulation and secrets. I hope my experience can help others recognize that sometimes walking away from toxic family dynamics is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved.